About 5 years ago, I was working with a client. She'd been on her own for about 12 years in business for herself. And at that point in time, she was exhausted. She'd recently been bilked out of some money by a client of hers. She had a partner who wasn't keeping up their side of the bargain, and she was just tired. So she'd made the really tough decision to go back to work in the corporate world. She was okay with that, actually, rather excited because she knew of the possibilities that lay in front of her. She had applied for many jobs, and she was in the process of interviewing with 7 different companies. What she didn't know was which job would be the best choice for her. As we worked through her options and listed all the factors that she was taking into consideration, things became a little bit more clear for her. The 7 opportunities dwindled down to 3, to 2, and then to ultimately one that she landed on that was going to be the job that she wanted. Now, don't get me wrong, she still had the opportunity to be employed in these 7 opportunities, but there was one choice that kept rising to the top for her in terms of what was identified as being the best option for her. She didn't know why. She couldn't really understand it, but she'd used the system and she trusted it, so she went with it. She interviewed for that job and she interviewed more, and then she interviewed some more. And she got to the final stages, and then she learned that she wasn't successful. And she was extremely disappointed because she'd worked through the system, and the system had told her that that was the job she was supposed to take. So she was upset, but that didn't hold her down. And she kept searching the job boards for another few days. And only about 3 days after she'd been declined for that job, did she see a posting for the exact same job again. So she got on the phone and she called the manager that she'd been working with for the opportunity. And she said, "Hey, is that the job that I applied for? Is it open again?" And he said, Yeah, it is the job you applied for. And my client said, "Well, what happened? Can you divulge that information?" And he said, "Well, as you know, we made an offer to someone else, but they got counter offered where they're currently working and decided to stay there. So the opportunity's open again." So the client said, "Well, is there still an opportunity for me to be considered for this role? Because this is the role I'm supposed to take." And that afternoon, my client had a job offer, which they accepted and started 2 short weeks later. Hi, my name is Dana Peaver, and I'm the Decision Smith. About 30 years ago, in my first year of university, I was sitting in a psychology class, listening to a lecture about decision making. And on the board in front of me was this huge, onerous matrix that looked so convoluted and confusing to me. But I could really see the validity in having a system to make tough decisions. Of course, this one was used in psychology research. But what that did for me was it spawned a need to find some sort of system, some sort of method that I, just a layman, could use on a daily basis to make tough decisions in my life. And that's when the Decision Smith system was born. So for the past 30 years, I've worked honing that craft, making my own decisions in my life. And about 15 years ago, I started introducing it to my clients. I had no idea the impact it would have on their lives. Now, when we look back at that client who made that decision about 5 years ago to take this job, that it was actually me. I'd been on my own for 12 years. And like I said, I was exhausted. I was the marketer. and I was the bill collector, and I did all the work, and I was a wife and a mom of two teenagers, and I was just exhausted. And it kind of tugged at my pride a little bit to feel like I needed to go back to the corporate world. But I used my system, first of all, to determine that that would be the best option for me at the time. And then as I was interviewing, I learned that this opportunity was supposed to be the one I was to follow. So I started that job about 4.5 years ago, and I'm currently on my sixth title with the company. I love my day job so much. You couldn't drag me away from it. So I spend my days working at something I love, and then I get to spend my evenings and my weekends helping people make tough decisions. Who gets a dual life where they love doing both of those sides equally on a daily basis? They're never exhausted. They never want to give up. I just feel so fortunate. Let me tell you another story. About 9 years ago, I was working with an athlete. He'd been playing a particular sport and he'd been in a certain league for about 5 years. He noticed that the level of his playing wasn't increasing at the speed that he would have liked. And he thought about what that might be attributed to. And he realized that the league he was playing in was a great league, but the players that he was with were certainly either of similar or lower caliber to his skill set, along with the teams that they faced. And he had learned of another league in town that also was available for his age group, but seemed to have a little bit higher caliber playing, and played against other teams that were, of better sportsmanship in terms of their skill levels. So he came to me and he was really distraught. And I asked him what the issues were, and he said, "Well, I have to decide if I'm going to move to this new league or not." And so I asked him a few more questions just to kind of, get an understanding of where he was and what he was taking into consideration. And the things that were concerning him were, he had such a loyalty to his team and to the coaches who had, worked with him for the past 5 years or so. And he really enjoyed that league and just the camaraderie he felt with his teammates. It was really a family, and that was really tugging on him. But he also knew that he needed to be able to, find a different way to improve his skill set if he wanted to, get better at his sport. So when we were looking at the options he had, he obviously could stay with his current league or move to his new league. And then again, we looked at all the factors he was taking into consideration, and some of them are as I listed. Part of the system involves weighing those factors and what importance they play in your life right now. And then the final step of the system is really just scoring each of those factors against the options that you have. So before we got into that, I said, how quickly do you need to make a decision? And he said, "Well, tryouts are this weekend." And I said, Tryouts?" I said, I thought you were making a decision about whether or not you had to move to that league." And he said, "Oh, well, no, I haven't been offered a spot yet. I just need to determine whether or not I try out." In that moment, I said to him, "Whoa," I said, "let's back things up here. You don't need to make as big a decision today as you thought you did. The only decision you need to make today is whether or not to try out." And I could see the relief on his face, and his shoulders came down and relaxed a little bit, and he was like, "Oh, well, that's easy. Of course I try out." And that's what I said to him. I said, If you don't try out, you don't get the opportunity even to be offered a spot on the team, and then that decision is actually made for you." So what we decided to do at that time anyway was pretend that he'd been made an offer to start on that team and uh, walk through the process. He got into it and he envisioned himself with this new team, and we were going through the factors. He actually got really emotional and he started to cry. And I stopped him. I said, what's going on in your head? And he said, we don't have to do this anymore. I know what my answer is going to be. And I said, what's your answer going to be? And he said, well, if I got a spot on the new team, I would take it. As much as it would, I'm loyal and everything. I know I need to move in this direction. And he said, so, we don't have to finish this. And I said, could we finish it just, so that we get through the whole system, the whole process, to make sure that the results that we get, as we put in our final numbers, match what you're feeling right now. And he said, okay, we can certainly finish, going through the entire process. So we did. We worked through the process and we used my app, punched in all the numbers, and the score and the result showed that he should definitely consider moving to this new league. So he went and he tried out, and a few weeks later, he received a phone call, and the coach at the time said, "We're going with the exact same team that we had last year, and we're adding one additional player, and we'd like that player to be you." And without hesitation, he said, "I accept." He didn't have to think about it. He already knew exactly what his decision was going to be if that opportunity was offered to him. And I tell you that story because um, it's near and dear to my heart. It's a story about my son, and he was 11 years old when we walked through that decision-making process. And the profound effect it had on him and the emotion that I watched him go through was something I'll never forget. I really, uh, before that, hadn't seen the impact of being able to make tough decisions confidently on kids. And it's really stayed with me. And I absolutely love the fact that he was so confident in being able to make that decision. So he wound up playing for that team for another 5 years. And then he decided to change sports, and he's been playing that new sport ever since. Another decision that precipitated out of his move to that new league, and I'll tell you it was baseball, was that when he was 12 years old, so his first year in that new league, they were afforded the opportunity to play in the American Little League championships in Cooperstown that they host every summer for 12-year-olds. So as we were preparing to spend a week there with our family, we decided to rent, a property there to stay at for the week. And my husband and I had narrowed it down to two properties that stood out for us. And we listed our factors, and for some reason, we couldn't decide between the two of us which one we were going to rent. So I said to my husband, I said, how about we both do the app individually and work through the process, and let's see what the numbers show us. And he said, That's fine. I'm cool with that. I don't mind doing that." So he worked through the system, and actually the results he got were pretty equal. There wasn't one that shone over the other. And when I did the app and worked through the process, there was one that got such high scores in comparison to the other one that was much lower. So when my husband saw those results, he was like, "Oh, all right, that's a no-brainer. Obviously, there are a lot of things about the one cabin that you like so much more than the other one. Let's go with that decision." And we did, and it was a great week, and we had no issues. And the decision that we made, we were both very confident in, knowing that we'd taken all of our factors into consideration. So those are quite a few personal stories that I've shared with you about helping people make tough decisions. I want to tell you a story about a client I worked with about 6 years ago. She was someone who was very successful and had grown up in a town where her family all lived. And she was actually now living in the house that she'd grown up in and had been gifted to her by her family, as some of her relatives had passed on. But she actually felt a little bit stuck in that town, and she felt a little handcuffed, a little stifled. She wasn't sure if staying in that town was going to afford her the ability to achieve everything she wanted to in her life. So we, started having some initial conversations about this tough decision that she was going to have to make. And certainly the feelings and thoughts of her family were at the forefront of what she was taking into consideration making these decisions. And those types of decisions, when you're looking at those factors, they weigh on you heavily. They really um, skew your ability to make decisions based on what's best for you. And I think that's why we talked so much, because we really just needed to get that all out on the table and make sure that she was looking at all of the factors that were coming into this decision. And I think at the end we'd listed like 30 or 35 things that she was taking into account. A really long, robust, sincere, authentic list. And at one point, as we were determining the weight of those factors, so as we go through the system, we talk about how important each one is to the client at that point in their life. And she actually was silent for a moment when we were talking about one of the factors. And I wondered if it was not an in-person conversation. It was virtual. And I'd wondered if we'd lost connection. And I said, "Hello, are you still there?" And she said to me, "Yes." And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, I can't really express how I'm feeling right now." And I said, "Well, why is that?" And she said, "Well, you're asking me questions and you're making me dig really deeply. This process, is really opening me up and forcing me to dive deeper than I would without this system." And at that point, she said to me, "I can't stay in this town any longer. I can't stay under the shadow of my family and be able to pursue what it is, my passion in life. I can't stay here anymore." And as she said that, oh, I'm getting a little emotional just sharing this story. As she said that to me, she said, "I have never even admitted that to myself, let alone out loud to a stranger." She said, "I don't know what magic powers you have, but you just solidified for me what decision it is that I need to make for me right now." So as we finalized the process and got her final scores, you know, she made the decision to move, and she did that, and she's more successful than she could have ever imagined. So the power of walking through this system, of having a system, is not lost on me, and I sure hope it's not lost on you. How often are you faced with making a tough decision that you're not even sure where to start? There are so many people who use a pros and cons list. And, you know, there is some validity in that. But for me, it's almost the start of the system that I share with you. It's a good way to get all your thoughts down on paper and to start thinking through what it is that will be good and bad as it relates to an option you might have in front of you. But it certainly doesn't afford you the opportunity to really look at how much one factor might weigh in comparison to another. Typically your mind your intuition is already headed towards making a certain decision. And when you create a pros and cons list, you've got unconscious bias that creeps in. And if you already know that there's, a choice that you want to make, your mind plays tricks on you and automatically creates the pros side longer than the cons side, if that's the decision deep down that you want to make. So, as you have a system, and not simply a pros and cons list, but a system that allows you to explore your options, take into account all the factors that you're considering, really weigh those factors and look truthfully at how impactful those are to you at that point in time. And then looking at scoring each option against those factors, you have no idea the mm, satisfaction that people feel by being able to hold in their hands the results of that work, that deep, authentic work in making a tough decision. So, I want to tell you one last story. And this is about a decision that was made just in the last 2 weeks. It was in our house. And I could sit here and tell you so many stories about people making purchases in terms of real estate, new cars, where to um, save their money from a financial perspective. My goodness, the types of decisions that I've helped people with, I could write lists and lists and lists of them. So think about some of the tough decisions that you've had to make. This system can help you in future, could have helped you in the past, and will always be there for you. Once you learn this system, you can't unlearn it. It's like riding a bike. You might get a little bit rusty if you don't continue to use it on a regular basis. But once you know how to do it and once you understand the impact of it, you'll never turn back. It's like, when you were a kid and you had your bike and you finally learned how to ride it, and the freedom that you had to be able to just go wherever you wanted, to go to a friend's house or go to the beach or go to the park on your bike instead of having to walk or ask for a ride. The freedom that afforded you. Well, that's the same with this system. You really, really have the freedom to make great choices in your life. And it's so impactful. The weight that is lifted off you when you know you've taken everything into account in making your decision, I can't even describe it. I do it for myself on a very regular basis, and I help clients do it every single day. And and most people say, "Where has this been my entire life?" So the one last story I want to share with you has to do with, the fact that it's 2020 and we are still in the middle of a pandemic. So my daughter is in grade 12, senior year of high school, and she is just finishing up her first quadmester. So what her school board did was her 8 courses that she's taking this year, they divided it into 4. So they're taking 2 courses each quadmester. So we started, the first one in September, and then that first quadmester is ending mid-November. The new one, second one will start mid-November. So just about 2 weeks ago, she had to decide whether or not she would attend her next quadmester in person, like she was doing this quadmester, or if she would do everything virtually. And it was really, really interesting watching her thought process about this. We got an email from the board saying we had to make a decision, and if we were changing what we were currently doing. So, like I said, she's currently in school. We had to let them know by a certain date. So, for the week leading up to the date the decision had to be made, I would say to her, "Hey, have you decided if you're going, to school virtually or in person?" And she was really taken aback, and she'd put her hands up and she'd say, "I, I can't talk about it. I just I can't go there. Let's talk about it another time." And I could see her really struggling with the decision. And, she lives under my roof. She's, been accustomed to making decisions, with our system almost her entire life. So to see her really struggling with this decision was piqued my curiosity. But I didn't push it. So every couple of days, I'd say, hey, are we ready to talk about? Oh, mom, I can't talk to you about it today. I just can't do it. So finally, the day prior to our response having to be put in, I said, okay, we need to, make a decision here. I said, are you willing to walk through the system and go through the app? And she said, yes. She knew it had to be done, but like I said, she was so reticent and reluctant to do it. And I could see her struggling. I said, what's going on in your mind? What's happening? And she said, mom, like the options are just 50-50. Like I can't see how either one of them could be a good choice over the other one. Like I'm just struggling. And I could see her physically trying to stay on the top of that fence and not fall off. And her muscles were tense and her shoulders were upright and her jaw was clenched and she was just carrying so much weight with this decision. So we walked through the steps, we looked at the options. She took into account all the factors she was taking into consideration. And, keep in mind, she's 16, almost 17. But she's, got more emotional intelligence than many adults that I know. And she even, input some factors that included her inadaptability to change. So, she was really digging deep and being authentic in her list. And so when she had finally completed her list of factors and weighed them and was ready to score her options against those factors, she actually had my phone in her hand as she was doing it. And I watched her face and she pressed the button to get her results and her jaw dropped to her chin. And I was so curious as to what the results showed her. And I looked at her and I said, what's going on? And she turned the results to me. And one result scored an 88 and the other scored a negative 24. Now, keep in mind, she had been sitting on this 50-50 fence for a week. And when she finally input that information into the system and got the results, it showed such a disparity in terms of the choices that she had that I know she wished she'd done it a week earlier and foregone all the turmoil she suffered for that week not having made a decision. She looked at me and she said, well, I guess I'm staying home next semester. And that was that. We put her response in. The smile came back to her face. She relaxed. She was, her old, confident, happy, jovial self, not, encumbered by the weight of that decision. And off she went. I could sit here for another hour and tell you stories about tough decisions that I've worked through clients with and the fantastic results that they've achieved based on knowing and being confident in their decisions. I'm sure you all make decisions on a daily basis, but I ask you, how confident are you in getting to the other side of those decisions? So, if you are feeling like you might be interested in gaining some clarity around being able to conquer decisions confidently, I'd like to offer a great place for you to start. And that's just getting into the right mindset to be able to understand where you are in your life, what you're tolerating, and how you need to move forward. So I have a 5-day challenge that I offer to people. It's called the Year of You Challenge. It's free, and all you need to do is go and sign up at yearofyouchallenge.com. You'll get a new exercise each day, and after 5 days, you'll have some real clarity around how you'd like to move forward and potentially some decisions that you might have to make in your life. I also suggest that if you want more information about some of the books that I've written, some of my processes, some stories, some of the blueprints that I offer for tough decision making, everything can be found at thedecisionsmith.com. That's my handle for any social media. If you're interested in following, I always have great stories to share about clients who have come through the other side of making tough decisions in all facets of their life. Thanks so much for spending this time with me, and I look forward to connecting with you and helping you make tough decisions.